Okay, we about ready. It's 9:14. My name is Ron. I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you all here to our 2019 anniversary mini convention. Thanks for coming out early. Scott's going to come up here. He's going to cover steps 1 and 2. We'll get, as we go through the day, we'll give you a bunch of updates. So I don't think there's a lot to talk about. Let's just introduce Scott and give him a warm welcome.
Everybody, I'm Scott Trainer. I am an alcoholic.
Hey, Scott.
I would like to thank the thousands of... No, I'm just kidding. I think this is great. You know, you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, okay? I learned that long ago. You know, it's a privilege and honor to be here. My home group is the Outsiders group in Herkimer, New York, and that's upstate New York, where they're actually calling for snow today. Talked to my daughter, and she said, "Do you realize it's snowing?" And it's like, yeah, I saw the weather report. And then when I'm down here in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, it's nice and sunny and beautiful. And it's good to be here. I'd like to thank Ron for asking me here. And it's always a privilege and honor to get to participate in the program that absolutely saved my life. You know, changed my perception of reality, changed my thinking. I don't think the way I used to think. I don't do the things I used to do. And I'm eternally grateful. You know, step 1, where we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable, was probably the easiest step that I ever did. I first did it in 1973, when Judge Kramer sentenced me to Alcoholics Anonymous. It's my first arrest, assault and battery on a police officer, drunk and disorderly conduct. And you got to go to AA, and he sent me to the Young People's Group in Quincy, Massachusetts, just outside Boston. And the youngest young person was like 30, and I was 13, you know, just turning 14. Yeah, I'll admit I got a problem. To the judge, to the probation officer, to my mom, you know, but accepting it to the innermost self, that was a different story, because I'm different. You know, if you just leave me alone, I'll be okay. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I believe people come into Alcoholics Anonymous for a couple of reasons, and really only a couple of reasons initially, and one is for relief and one is for recovery. I was not looking for a 12-step program, a spiritual solution to a soul sickness I didn't think I had. I just believed I was too young, and I got caught. And so, you know, before, they didn't have, and this is back in the 70s, the early 70s, they were still using the second edition. Bill Wilson had just died. They didn't have the 12 steps and 12 traditions on the walls like they do, is custom everywhere in the country now. And so the group I belonged to really didn't talk about the big book or steps. You know, they talked about just meeting makers make it, and just come to meetings and you'll be okay. And I don't know about you, but that information was killing me, because, I guess I believe water seeks its own level. And what I came looking for in Alcoholics Anonymous, I came looking with. Okay, and I was looking for the easier, softer way. I wasn't looking to read books and do steps and everything. I just wanted you off my back. And so, seeing people in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I don't say this to disrespect the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm well versed at the steps, I'm well versed at the traditions, the concepts. But you didn't talk about drugs from the podium of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's an outside issue. Okay, you talked about alcoholism. And I remember sitting there, being in Alcoholics Anonymous for a few years, in and out, one jackpot after another, DYS, Division of Youth Service. I don't know what they have here in Pennsylvania. It's like kiddie jail, you know. And telling me I needed to find a sponsor, someone that could help me with these steps. And I remember sitting there, and I was 16 years old, St. Catherine's church like this. It was an Episcopal church. And I remember it was a Monday night. It was the Monday night hot dog meeting, because they had hot dogs, and everybody used to come and love the hot dogs. And this kid was taking a And I say kid, he was like 33, okay? And he was taking an anniversary medallion for 4 years. And how it worked was, let's say Ron's my sponsor. Ron will get up and tell you all about me, the steps I've taken this year. I love that, this year. That's really what they talked about, the steps I took this year. And then I would get up and say a few words. And this guy, Fred, was getting his 4-year anniversary medallion. And he stood up there and he was really nervous. He had his medallion and he goes, you know, I was really nervous this morning when I woke up because I knew I was going to have to get up here in front of all you people. So I smoked a joint to take the edge off. And he got done and everybody clapped. And I loved what he had to say. So I went right up and asked him to be my sponsor. That was my first experience with sponsorship in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, make no mistake here, make no mistake, Dr. Silkworth closes all those loopholes. When I finally read the book, when I finally took that prescription that's outlined in the book, Dr. Silkworth says that we can't take alcohol in any form, and that the only treatment we have to offer is complete abstinence. See, I didn't know that. I thought a little marijuana maintenance was fine. As long as I admitted I had a problem with alcohol, I could still smoke weed. See, back then, some of my peers in AA took things like Darvon, Librium, stuff like that, and claimed sobriety because all that was an outside issue. I remember going over to my sponsor's house to start working the steps, and he was sitting at his little coffee table there and stuff, smoking a joint as I came in to start working the steps. You know, I think of that now and I think about how many people we killed with the misinformation, the misconceptions on the things that I thought I knew about Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, it says in the back that there's a principle that's a bar against all information, that's proof against all argument, that cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. And that principle is contempt prior to investigation. See, I thought I knew what AA was. I thought I knew what AA was from my dad coming to AA. You know, I remember in the 60s getting woke up and my brothers standing in the kitchen and my mom crying, and bottom line here is my dad had hit and killed a woman in a blackout, okay? She had crossed in front of him. And how do you process that as a young kid, that your dad just killed someone? You know, and I watched him continue to drink. I watched him go to AA, okay? And so in my mind, as a young man, AA really didn't work. You know, AA was a con job. It was just a soft con to get you off my back. So the first step, admitting we're powerless over alcohol, without connecting the dots, starting with the doctor's opinion. You know, I'm not a big book Nazi, as you hear some people say, but I've become very well versed at the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the steps that actually free us. And I think it amazing that when people talk about the first 179 pages, and I include the doctor's opinion with that, or if you prefer, the first 164 pages of the actual program, depends on which way you want to look at it. The big book and the authors there, and I'm talking about Bill Wilson and some of our founders and early members, take really 51 pages out of that 164, the first 51, just on the first part of the surrender, the half of the first step. Admitted I was powerless over alcohol. That's one. 51 pages on that. And that, next one, my life had become unmanageable. So having the misconceptions that I thought it was just real easy to admit sent me down the rabbit hole. Because I would listen to people say, you got to hit a bottom, you got to hit a bottom. And I would get in trouble. I would get in a jackpot. I would get fired. I would get suspended from school. I would get arrested. Whatever the moment was, and I would admit that I had that problem, and that's a bottom. And I would think in my mind, well, that's not that bad. You know, at least I didn't kill the guy. At least this didn't happen. At least That didn't happen. So really, what's a bottom? And you'd hear people say your bottom's when you decide to stop digging. Your bottom's when you decide to put down the shovel. I would say my bottom's always had a trap door, okay? And it would never explain to me that first part of the first step, where I admitted. Now the big book says, when we admit it to our innermost self, this is the first step in recovery. What is that? Now, Dr. Silkworth talks about the being maladjusted to life and full flight from reality and outright mental defectives. And I like to joke and say those are some of our finer quality traits, okay? Because they are, and they're true to some extent. And I love it because the book says to a great extent, some of us, right? Okay? We don't like to be told that. So the delusion that I can rest satisfaction if I only manage well, and I go through this process of surrender. Now, where did that surrender come from? Because they didn't talk about surrender in the book in an early AA when it first came out. That actually term came from a guy named Dr. Tebow, who was a great benefactor of Alcoholics Anonymous, psychiatrist, board of trustees, all that other stuff. He had a patient, was a woman, who actually was in church and came in to see him on Monday and said, I figured it out. I figured out what happened to us. And this was all in the flying blind period of Alcoholics Anonymous. Said, I figured out what happened to us. And Dr. Tebow, oh yeah, well, what's that? She said, we surrender. And she had heard that in church. And that opened a whole new annal on that word surrender in Alcoholics Anonymous, because Dr. Tebow, and I'm paraphrasing, went on to write that that's exactly what happens to us, exactly. That it's really what it is it's when our egos get deflated just enough so that we can experience that psychic change sufficient enough to recover. We, in our book and stuff, talk in different terms, but spiritual experience, spiritual awakening, psychic change, they're all interchangeable. It's when my ego gets deflated just enough and I surrender that I can have that psychic change that's going to be sufficient enough for me to recover. He said the problem, though, is that the ego has such a tremendous capacity for resurgence. Okay? I get my rights back. I wouldn't, earlier when I'm talking about those bottoms, I would have that surrender, not knowing what they were. Not knowing that I would look at myself in the mirror and say, you son of a bitch, look what you did to me again. I don't want to live like this anymore. What do I got to do? How do I change? And I didn't have the right direction. I didn't have, as our book talks about, and there'll be in later steps, someone that was properly armed with the facts about themselves, let alone alcoholism, right? But themselves and what they did. See, when you're talking about that first part of the first step leading into the second part, that my life was unmanageable, they go on to talk about this common solution. That's the good news that this program has to offer people. People say, what is that common solution? It's the 12 steps. And it starts with that first half of the first step, where I admit to my innermost self, I don't want to live like this anymore. What do I got to do to change? Okay, I have surrendered. I have had that ego deflation at depth, deep down in here, because that's where it's going to happen. Not with the judge, not with the wife, not with the kid. It's when you look at yourself in the mirror and you're just sick and tired of being sick and tired, and what do I got to do? So I accept that. I'm screwed. I'm doomed. I know that. Life's unmanageable. Well, no, I still got a plan. Second part. I got plans. I got goals. I got dreams. I got aspirations, things I want to do, the things I want to become. Unmanageability simply means not achieving one's purpose. Okay, that's really what it means. So if I can go back to that moment of that surrender and that ego deflation, I understand that I'm not achieving my purpose. So you connect the dots of the two. And that's what he does in the big book in those first 51 pages. And really what they are, I've heard different ways, and I'm not going to tell you there's a right or wrong way. I'm not saying this, but what I'm saying, in my opinion, from the big book in the early days when they had such a good success rate, is they were nothing more than conclusions of the mind. They're not workable steps where I have to work this step. It's really a conclusion of my mind, because when you get up to that page 63, that's dealing with the first two steps, and I'll get to the second, but it's saying being convinced. Being convinced of what? What does being convinced mean? Well, it's a conclusion of my mind. It's not something that you're going to tell me. It's not something that the judge is going to tell me, or the police officer. See, I have to be convinced, which is a conclusion of my mind, that I'm alcoholic. I accept that to the innermost self. My life's unmanageable. I'm not achieving my purpose in life. And then it's came to believe. Now you'll hear people say, I came to believe. See, this is the soft con of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because it says, if you read the step in the English language, it says, came to believe that. It doesn't say in. See, that's later. That's later. Came to believe that a power is going to restore me to sanity. See, when we're trying to figure out this conception of God and came to believe that, a lot of us go back to our childhood, whether it be Catholicism or whatever your religion was, or you were exposed to or weren't exposed to. We have preconceived notions on this God sitting on the throne and going to be cast in the lake of fire for all the things we did wrong, and this was my conception. Had a nun, that Aunt Germaine, my grandfather's sister, who said that I was going to be castrated for all my sins and stuff, and I didn't even know what, I would laugh and run away. I didn't even know what castration was, but she said that to me. Now, years later, when I'm in the penitentiary, and I'm reading stuff, and I find out what that is, like, ooh, thank God that didn't happen, right? But they would say these things to me, and my God was a punishing God who kept that record. And so even after being baptized and my first Holy Communion and all that, it's funny, because we become seekers later in life. I was seeking back then. See, remember what I said earlier, what I believe, what I came looking for, I came looking with. And see, one of the beauties of this, in those first 63 pages, first 51, then up to 63, it says that deep down in every one of us is the fundamental idea of God. Maybe obscured by calamity, pomp, the worship of other things, but it's here, and it's only here that he may be found. It was so with us. And I started looking out there for what this conception of God is and was. The beauty of that second step and the way it's written in our program is we're not a religious organization. You are free to choose your conception no matter what you choose. Doesn't matter whether it's an organized religion. Doesn't matter if it's Great Spirit. We use different terms in our program. Great Spirit, universal intelligence, creative intelligence, whatever your conception is. I love it, because I was sharing the other day in my home group, because there's a person in there that has a problem with their higher power and believing in this power. And I got to share an experience with a friend of mine many years ago in California, of his experience when he came in, because I was there when he came in. And he was not raised religious, never went to church, never said a prayer, Our Father, like we do at most meetings, at the end of the meeting. And his nickname was Twin Jim. And the first time we stood at the Raptors in Newhall, California, my old home group, and we held hands to do the Lord's Prayer, he had never done it, so he was listening. Our Father, who art in heaven, right? Hallowed be thy name. In his mind, in that surrender, okay, the psychic change, the sufficient enough to recover, not the spiritual experience, awakening, but that psychic change and that surrender, he heard, Herald, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. And for the next 5 years, now this guy's got 30 years sober, 30-something years sober now. But for the next 5 years, his first 5 years in sobriety, when he did the Lord's Prayer, he prayed to Harold. Okay? And I'll be god darned if he didn't stay sober. He stayed sober. Okay? What the mind believes, the mind can achieve. It's not that hard to come up with a conception of God. It's not a doorknob. I know another experience where a guy made it his doorknob. I can make anything, I'll make it the doorknob. And the steering committee, this is again at the Raptors, upgraded everything and they changed the door handles. And he came in and saw the door handle change, he went out and got drunk. True story. That was his excuse. So it's not a doorknob, it's not an inanimate object like that, okay, but it's something in spirit. And coming to believe that, this spirit can, and I see it in you, see, we can talk about AA. I think you posted something the other day about it. We can talk about this, we can analyze it, we can know the steps or the book and project what we think we know, but when we see it working in other people, we can't deny it. When I see you sober and I see the light come on, and the book says that, it's surely an experience you will not want to miss. We know you will not want to miss it. You can't doubt the power of God, because that's what it says. I had to stop doubting the power of God. When we're in that surrender process and in the admittance and the coming to believe that, we're still very sick. We're a prey, it says on page 52, we're a prey to misery and depression. We can't seem to make a living. All these things, we call that untreated alcoholism. And what's our problem? We had to stop doubting that power. What is that power? I've seen it manifest in all sorts of different things. But the mind will convince the mind through that self-absorption, that self-centeredness and self-seeking, that I know. When really I don't know. It says we can't define it. It says we can't answer the riddle. Okay? The common solution for us is that we know that there is a power, because that's the main object, is to enable us to find the power that's going to solve our problem. Right? That's the main object. The main thing is that we believe in this power and live along the spiritual lines. So when we're in this process of coming in, it's very important, because I believe words have the power to heal. I believe they have the power to kill too. And a lot of times we hear people talking that really giving advice that aren't qualified to give advice. They're not qualified. And I'm not talking about the sharing the one alcoholic talking to another, and I'm not talking about that. But sometimes the ego starts taking over, and I want to become a marriage counselor and a business counselor and a this counselor and a that. And I'm not, I can't even run my own life. I make mistakes myself. But I see that sometimes where people, they get that badge of honor of sober, and now they want to start running other people's lives. And I don't think that that's what our program was designed to do. I really don't believe that. And I see a lot of two-steppers that come in and they'll admit and they'll accept and they'll believe that, and then they want to start carrying the message without doing the work in between. See, my sponsor drilled into me that the elevator to sobriety is broke, you must use the steps. They're in line for a reason, okay? And if I really, and you gotta really hear me here, because if I really have a problem with that second step, came to believe that, in the 12 and 12 it talks about that there's a mental issue here, okay? Remember, it's spiritual, it's physical, it's mental. Dr. Silkworth says any part that leaves out the physical is incomplete, because I have that physical allergy that differentiates me from other people as a distinct entity. I don't trigger that unless the mental comes in, the mental obsession, and I drink and I put alcohol in my body, and then that alcohol demands another drink. So the physical is really important. But the second step with the mind and that mental masturbation that I can do about what is God and what came first. Is it God? Is it Great Spirit? Is it Mother Earth? Okay? And be seeking all this other stuff. If I can, and that's what I call as mental masturbation inside my head. If I really, honestly, deep down, have a problem with that second step, that's really not my problem. It's really not my problem. My problem is the first step. That's my problem. See, because if I have been brought through the ringer, and let me say this too, because they're all different ringers. Your moment may have been a car accident. Your moment may have been the way your child looked at you, or your husband left you, or going to jail, or whatever your moment was when you had that surrender and that ego deflation at depth where you just didn't want to live like that anymore. If that was your moment, that's your moment. They're all different. Where you realize, I don't want to live like this, and you surrender. And you get to that second step, and you got a real big problem with that second step. It's really the first step, because if you've been beaten, brought through that ringer, that emotional ringer, physical, spiritual, doomed, okay, pursuing it into the gates of insanity or death, you've lost the power of choice. You're a failure as a husband, as a son, as a brother, and you know it. And you mean I got to believe in a power? What's the catch here? See, it says it in our book. It's all explained when we read. It was all explained to me when I finally read it. I had to stop doubting that. See, I will play with my mind and say, it says it in our book about, they're not always easy alternatives to face. To live on this spiritual basis, or to be doomed to this alcoholic life. We say, what's the catch? There's got to be a catch here. And you hear people talk about if you had cancer and you went to the doctor and the doctor says, hey, you just got to admit and you got to accept it and you got to believe and we can arrest this disease. You just got to go to a meeting once a day. You got to read this book. You got to clean up the wreckage of your past. You got to do this, and that. You jump at it. And yet, we balk at it. And this is a terminal, fatal disease that wants to kill you. It wants to rob everything from me. Yet I'm new, and I look at these steps on the wall, and I listen to some people share, and I separate myself from. Because it wasn't that bad. I didn't experience that. It's so important, and one of the lost arts in Alcoholics Anonymous is sponsorship. You know, they believed back then it was much more important to sponsor than to be sponsored. Can you imagine if some of the early guys, and I'm talking the early guys, you know, Bill and Bob and Clarence Snyder, and just all these guys. And then later girls, Marty Mann, Florence Rankin, who got drunk. But anyway, can you imagine if they thought, well, it's really important that I'm sponsored. And what does my sponsor tell me to do? They believe in going out and getting them and sponsoring people. And getting them on the path. And getting them through this process in as quick a time as possible. See, when I finally surrendered, my friend Jim Buckley would say, and you heard me say it at the beginning, relief or recovery, right? We come in here for relief or recovery. He said, what are you looking for, Scotty? Now, this last time, I said recovery. He said, that's good. He said, you can get that a couple different ways. And I looked at him. He said, you can go over there and sit down and be honest with yourself and think about where the alcohol has taken you. He said, or you can take the next 20 years around here and contemplate why you're an alcoholic, and was it because you sat on the toilet the back way, or was it because your dad did this? He says, and I'll leave it up to you, which is the easier, softer way. And it all goes back to that first step. See, we really miss in the program the foundation of the first step. The foundation of the surrender, the gratitude, the wonderment, to just maybe I can get this, the willing to go to any length. See, there's only those two questions that, and that's another thing is that we've confused, is when I came in AA back in the early 70s, they had 10 questions. Then John Hopkins came up with 20 questions. Then it was a 20-question sheet. And last time I looked, it was 44 questions, okay, on whether I got a problem. Now, back in the day, and this is really the success rate, they had 2 questions, and they're right in the book. And they're in those first 51, 63, depends on how you look at it, pages. And it's if when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take. I could answer that when I was 16. When I started, I had the best of intentions, but I never knew what was going to happen once I put alcohol in my body. Okay, as it was later explained to me, that allergy of the body took over. It's like being, I'm a cook by trade, so if you had a cucumber and you went through the pickling process of vinegar and stuff and it became a cucumber, it could never go back to becoming a cucumber. Once I crossed whatever line you want to look at, family, friends, faith, spiritual, physical, whatever that line is that I crossed where it was no longer fun, and I became an alcoholic, there was no going back to it. But I kept trying, because I'm not a quitter, right? None of us are a quitter. And so, crossing that line, it was never explained to me the process of the allergy of the body, putting it into my system that was going to create this chain of events, because I'm a blackout drinker too, and I never know what's going to happen. Or if when drinking, or if when drinking you have little amount over the amount you take, or if when drinking you can't quit entirely, you're probably alcoholic. What is that, quit entirely? Well, I can quit drinking today. I'll just smoke a little weed. Later it would become a little social heroin, a little rock cocaine, whatever the trip is. Because I'm the magic elixir, trying to drink more, drink less. I think that's what it means, can't quit entirely. Because they had problems back then. They talk about gin and sedatives. What's that? That's drugs and alcohol, right? We take all sorts of things to try to make us okay. To make us okay. And I can go for a while not drinking as long as I'm on some of these other substances. But when they stop working, I always go back to the drinking. Now I'm doing. So it was never explained to me, those 2 questions, because I would look at those 10 questions. See, remember, I'm a kid. I didn't really have a job. Have you ever missed work? No. You know, you ever done this, ever done that? No, I didn't have a driver's license. I had never cracked up a car yet. I'd never done it. I didn't even have a watch. So without knowing the foundation of what an alcoholic is, and I'm not blaming AA or people that were in the rooms. I'm really not blaming them, because again, what I came looking for, I came looking with, and I was not looking for that solution. I was looking for the differences and not the similarities. And so those were my excuses. The psychiatrist, right? Psychologist. I was more of the juvenile delinquent type. I was homicidal, suicidal, manic depressive. They would give me Thorazine, lithium, chloral hydrate, Haldol, but I was an alcoholic. They would strap me to a bed, pump me full of all these things. And see, all those things that I was diagnosed with are really misdiagnosis, because what I am is alcoholic. Those are some of the common manifestations of alcoholism through drinking and the delusion and stuff. And I didn't know any of these things when I was in AA as a young man. And that's why I'm very careful sometimes when I explain things, especially on one-on-one and sponsorship and stuff like that, because it's really, the conclusions of the mind are simple. If you're done, you're done, okay? If you've surrendered, you've surrendered. The problem, as I said earlier, though, is if I don't go through this process, and there'll be other speakers that are going to talk about making the decision and inventorying and cleaning up the wreckage of our past and present. I tell you what's a bitch, is wait till you're sober long enough that you get to go up to some people and make amends to the people you tried to help. In early sobriety, oh my God, I've had that experience. Where, 35 years ago I'm sponsoring people and stuff, and I'm talking out the side of my neck, and I didn't know. And I have had to go to them and make amends to them for trying to help them. Because really what I was doing was hurting them. Through thinking I knew. But you'll have other people talk about these steps and everything, and the predication is all, and the book says, I'm of course assuming the reader wants to stop drinking, right? Because they used to have to read back then, not just listen and stuff, and they didn't have the computers and social medias and all that other stuff, the easier, softer way. And there's qualifications. I've heard people by coming in that really aren't alcoholic. They come in and they're not an alcoholic. Our book asks those questions, Are you willing to go to victory over alcoholism? Go to any length for victory. Well, no, I'm not an alcoholic. My problem is just cocaine. Yeah, but if you drank, well, I don't drink. But if you did, you'd be an alcoholic, right? Well, I don't know, maybe. Because you want to help these people. I've never told someone, and I hear people say, just say you're an alcoholic, that way you can share in our meetings and stuff. And so with the singleness of purpose and the alcoholic helping the alcoholic, it's so very, very important for the integrity of our program, Alcoholics Anonymous, that it's here for the real alcoholic. Now you can have all those other issues, and trust me, I have them all. You can have all those other issues, but what's the base root? What is the thing inside of me that has surrendered to the fact that I'm powerless over alcohol? My life is unmanageable when I put alcohol in my body. My life is unmanageable sometimes when I don't put alcohol in my body. Okay? Through that peculiar mental twist. And that's another thing, that reason. I've found only two reasons, and really only two reasons why we get drunk again in our big book, and that's the insane thought or the trivial excuse. The insane thought or the trivial excuse. When my mind will convince my mind. Now, how does it convince my mind if I've done step one and I admit it, and I accept it, and I believe? Well, I take my will back. My friend said it's pretty hard for one God to recognize another God. And when I start down that path, I'm setting myself up. That's what I'm doing. And the mind will get you all the way back to that step one, and really it's step three, but it gets you to that point where it's not that you don't think you're an alcoholic. See, because I've drank before after sobriety. It's not that you don't think you're an alcoholic, it's just you don't like the way you feel, just like in the beginning. Remember, most people drink for the conviviality, the fun, I want to drink because I see others doing it with impunity, right? So it means that, and I can breathe. So what would cause that insane thought again, where I have no defense against it? No defense against it, except in a few rare occasions. That's willpower. So I got to have that power that I'm trying to find in the second step, where I'm getting into the action I've concluded in my mind, and I am about to begin this journey on this third step, which is an action step. Remember, steps 1 and 2, I've concluded in my mind, I've accepted it to my innermost self. Now I have to get into the action, and I'm going to start becoming, I know people will say we become seekers after we get to 10, 11, and 12. I so suggest that we become seekers back then, once we hit that second step, because we're embarking into this third step where I'm going to make this decision, and it's an action, and I'm going to start seeking this power that's going to solve my problem. See, it hasn't solved my problem yet. Okay? The main object, now I'm willing, and this is the key here, the honesty, the open-mindedness, the willingness. If you can condense those first 2 steps when you come in and you look at them and you dig down a little bit and you realize the full implications of it, the only thing you need from those conclusions of the mind is the honesty within you, the open-mindedness within you, the willingness within you to get on this path. You'll hear people say, I'm doing the best I can. I don't believe that. I don't think I have done anything in this program or in these steps to the best of my ability. I don't believe that. I believe I've done it to the best of my willingness. My relationship with my wife, to the best of my willingness. My relationship with you is to the best of my willingness. And some days I'm really willing. Other days I'm as sharp as a marble, and it's like, ah! And I'll fight it tooth and nail. But the simplicity of the big book, if you look at this, and I'll end this, from the doctor's opinion, right up to page 63, where we've concluded in our mind, being convinced, we were now at step 3. If you can read the doctor's opinion, Bill's story, there is a solution. Okay, chapter 3, we acknowledge. You can read those. I want you to do me a favor, because this is how they wrote back then, and this is how they did it in the big book. They would tell you what they're going to tell you, and then they tell you it. And then they tell you what they told you. And so if you read each of those chapters in its totality too, you're going to find the connecting of the dots, that they tell you it, they tell you what they told you, and then they tell you it, tell you what you're going to tell you what they told you. And it reinforces it up till that point, because they spend so much time in that big book, the majority of it, on those first part of the surrender step, 51 pages, up to 63, step 2. Now, out of a book that our program's only 164 pages, and they spend, let's just for argument's sake, say 60, okay? That's a lot percentage-wise on those first 2 steps. And yet we, collectively, as members of Alcoholics Anonymous, just brush right through it. All right, I admit it, I got a problem. What do I got to do? It's very serious. It has the power to heal, and it has the power to kill. And we lose a lot of people through not understanding some of those simple things that they outline in the book. Ron, thank you for having me here.
Let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll follow up with Scott coming in on step 3. Thank you.